Thank you for tuning in to The Arts in Business, a podcast that explores how artistic sensibilities can positively impact the business world. Many aspects of our daily existence are impacted by small and big businesses, and conversations around sustainability and customer-centered engagements have become more prevalent in the past years. Artists engage with existential questions of our human existence and can challenge many of our common business practices. How can an artistic lens, or the sensibilities that an artist uses in their daily practice, improve the way businesses are run and how they communicate? Through interviews with entrepreneurs, artists, and professionals, the show investigates how our communities can be transformed by actively engaging an artistic lens in our professional settings. I am Sebastian Grube, an artist, entrepreneur, and communications professional who aims to build a more compassionate world through amplifying voices. I am also the founder of Beyond Comms, a communications agency that unearths and amplifies the stories that inspire founders to build sustainable and impactful businesses. So let's dive in. Hi, dear listeners. Thank you for tuning in. I'm really excited to be talking to Michael today. He's a creative who works at the intersection of Web3 and the arts to create spaces of belonging. He co-founded the Zuckerberg Institute and has co-produced Tony Award-winning shows on Broadway. And I met Michael through a dear friend of mine and encountered him both online and in person through participating in the Zuckerberg Institute's #FirstClass and on the leadership retreat to Dharamsala in India that he organized, which was a truly life-transforming experience. So thank you for that. And I could say 1,000 things about Michael. He's an educator, researcher, and art practitioner who has traveled the world with the experimental theater company Theater Me Too and the Great Globe Foundation. And he truly is someone who I look up to as a mentor and as an example of just living as an artist and an entrepreneur and as someone who brings his full self to whatever he does. So it's an honor and a pleasure to be talking to Michael today. Hi, Michael.
Hi, Sebastian. What an honor and opportunity to speak to you and to learn together. I think one of the things I think are so beautiful about podcasts are they're really these opportunities both for a listener and for the two people interviewing or talking to figure something out together. So I really admire you a lot, and I've been reading a lot of your material, and so I'm really excited to discover something today.
Thank you. I'm excited to go down that road of discovery. Before we go down that road, I got this from you and Brian, this idea and the ritual of bringing something in a vessel of your choice to a meeting or a conversation. So what did you bring as your beverage and vessel of choice?
Yeah, I brought this. Someone gave this to me. So about, I guess, almost 3 years ago, at the start of the pandemic, I asked myself, what can I do to serve my community? And instinctively, I knew that like practice and ritual practice would be important. So I just said to Brian, I was like, hey, I really want to just organize these meditation in the morning. This is kind of the height of the pandemic. And so I called our dear friend Geshe Tenzin Damcho, and started leading these opportunities to be in conversation about mindfulness and also be in conversation about gratitude. You know, really training oneself to reframe in this really tumultuous moment of the unknown. And now I've continued that practice for 3 years with a small group of people where we gather every morning and meditate and share gratitude and set small intentions. And so this vessel says reasons to be grateful. And secretly, one of the people in that group started writing down anytime I would write things I'm grateful for. And about 3 months later, I get this coffee cup in my mailbox, and it's such a beautiful archive of all the things I was grateful for in that moment. And I just think it's such an amazing symbol and gift. So that's what I'm bringing. What about you?
I love that. I'm bringing something. I'm bringing a blue mug from West Elm because I just love that brand and I love the aesthetic. But also, it's from Abu Dhabi, and I recently moved from Abu Dhabi to Istanbul, and I bought this mug with. I don't remember if I bought it or if I got it as a gift, but to me, it holds a memory of living with my best friend and sharing a home together and having that experience of going through tumultuous times together and being there for each other. And so, yeah, kind of in the theme of gratefulness and gratitude, it kind of fits in.
That's
Yeah.
beautiful.
Let's dive in with some exploration and discovery.
You do
The
it.
first
Let's do it,
question that I
buddy.
love to start, yeah, the first question that I love to start these podcasts with is, when you hear artistic sensibilities, what does that mean to you?
Yeah, I really appreciate this question because I saw it and I started to. I love words, and so I started to be like, well, what does artistic mean? And then what does sensibility mean? So I looked up sensibility first, which is this notion of like a heightened awareness of senses. And then I looked up, well, what does it mean to be artistic? And that was this. I took away from it. There's many definitions of like being bent towards creation. So I take that phrase and I think to myself, okay, to have an artistic sensibility is this ability to listen to oneself, to sense certain emotions, and then to create out of that, or sense certain thoughts and create out of that. It's interesting. We go back to mindfulness already, almost immediately, as a practice towards how to get in touch with an artistic sensibility. Because I think the word artistic, I think people are very intimidated by that because people go, well, I'm not an artist and I'm not artistic. And for instance, I was just in Phoenix with my theater company. We were on tour of a piece that we made called Utopian Hotline. And I was sitting with a woman named Miriam, and it was at the local diner. And I became friends with her, and she was asking about what I do. And, often, I'm sure, like you, it's hard to explain what I do, but I try to make it as simple. I was like, oh, I'm here with a theater company. And she goes, oh, I'm not artistic. And I said to her, I was like, I'd like to disagree with you. I've been watching the way you take care of the customers that walk in here, and I think the way you approach hospitality is artistic. And she goes, huh, I've never thought about that way, honey. And it just made me smile because she is artistic. And I was inspired. I said, my friend Will Gadara, who's this amazing restaurateur, who really looks at hospitality as an arts practice. And so that's what I think about when I think about artistic sensibility, the ability to sense what is inside of you and to create out of that. And I think every human being does that. They just don't say it. And I think the opportunity when you train in the arts is that you're a little bit more aware of it in some ways because you've been given tools to then take what you're feeling or sensing or questioning and then create out of it.
Yeah. That reminds me of, by the time that this podcast is published, the article that I wrote about artistic sensibilities will have been released as well. And in that, I looked up that definition too of sensibilities, and what it brought me to was sense and senses, and feeling with your whole self. So taking not only, for me, it's also not only taking what's inside of you, but using the receptors that you have to take impulses from the outside, real look at how they affect you, and then, have that moment of creation out of that. I love that. But really expanding it to also, what do we see? What do we smell? What do we feel? How does that affect us? Because I think often I tend to kind of go back to what do I hear, or how does what someone says or does to me affect me, and how do I create out of that? But I think it's more than that too, when it comes to the arts.
Something that's coming in my mind, I was just with a friend, and she is a leader of a NASA mission, and we were talking about her NASA mission, and it's been delayed, and she was saying to me, like, yeah, I don't know if I want to spend the next 13 years working on this project because I've lost I've faced so many hardships in it. I've faced so many trials that I've lost the kind of excitement to get out of bed. And so when I think about artistic sensibility, I think one of the questions I'm wrestling with, because I just had that conversation last week, is what is going to make me jump out of bed? Like, so excited to conquer that. And I think we all have that within us, and we've certainly had moments in our lives where we've touched that. And the goal is to constantly sense how you get back on that line of going towards something. You and I both know these people, but there's a theater artist named Jerzy Grotowski who passed in 1999. He's one of the formative theater directors of the 20th century, and he told my friend, who was his pupil, it's like a line that you're on, and when you know that you're on this line, you can sense it, right? Everything. Some artists talk about their hair standing on the back of their neck, like you get goosebumps, you get excited to jump out of bed, and then you actually know when you get off of it. And I found in my own life, it's a constant dance, and really, if you look at it from creation or even like mythology, you're really riding this line of the known and the unknown. It's like dancing in some way. It literally is like, that's what dancing's like, and order and chaos and known and unknown. And if you can find yourself right on this line, oh my gosh, you feel alive. But darn it, is it hard? It's so hard, which is why you do podcasts like this, because you're searching for it,
Yeah, exactly. So maybe let's dig into that a little bit. You were talking about finding that line and walking on that line, but also how we as artists maybe have a little bit more training in discovering those sensibilities and turning them into creation.
Mm-hmm.
Take me a little bit on your journey, if you will, about your training, about discovering that line, maybe a moment when you've turned that sensibility into creation.
Yeah, so I think this is a life practice, and there are multiple ways that one can have a personal practice. And I think I know my foundation was in acting. And acting, if to really break it down, is listen and respond, right? So you're placing all of your attention on an object or a person, and sensing your impulse based off of another person or that object or what it produces out of you, and then acting on that. So, if you think about the foundation of my adult life is training that muscle, particularly impulse, action, reaction. And so as I searched the world and really encountered mentors, I started to listen to that sense in me, to be like, oh, I feel like I need to. One of the things I encountered when I was in my early 20s is a bunch of artists and teachers that had gone across cultures and that ultimately defined who they were in some way. So they became, their unique voice emerged from that moment. So I sensed that in myself. I said, oh, I too want to do that. And so I began to search the world and took it on instinct into action. And then that's what led me to do a Fulbright. And then I learned during my Fulbright the same kind of sensation when I came back, where I was like, where am I needed in the world? And there was this sense, these images that came up of working in a refugee camp. And so I launched into that and literally flew to Africa and lived there off and on for a year. And so I'm like literally like fast forwarding over like major periods of my life, but all to say is like you could see, I always, and I hope the listener feels this way, it's like the things that scare me, the cave you fear to enter holds the treasure you seek, as Joseph Campbell said. that the things that scare me, that my heart pounds, I go, I don't know how to do that. I go, I have to go. I'll give you a really quick example, then I'll continue on my training. Like, for instance, I got invited. I have to go. No, I have to go. I got an opportunity to go back to India in 2 weeks. And I thought to myself, okay, I need to go see Guru Kal, which is a teacher that both of you and I share, a teacher that I haven't seen since 2015. And so I contacted him and his wife, and he's actually filming a movie somewhere in Karnataka. And I thought, well, that kind of scares me a little bit because I've never been to that area, and I have to go kind of search for him. But I have to go. The answer is yes, I have to go. Because I know at the end of the day, I'll learn something in that journey, because it's, But all to say is, as I continued throughout my life, I started seeking communities of practice, and training both in mindfulness and my body, physical practice. And that led me to develop habits and rituals that in some ways cultivate or attempt to cultivate that sensibility. So I was saying to you before I got up, I was like, I got up this morning and I made myself work out. I made myself, take a cold shower. I made myself do certain things, listen to music, because I'm attempting to, in some ways, train that sensibility to be a little bit more awake. So that's how I would, in some ways, take 20 years of my life and be like, there's the kind of through line.
Thank you for distilling that through line. To me, you always seem to transition so easily between the arts and business, and bring that awareness even to something that might seem very dry, like leadership coaching.
Sure.
And talking about businesses. How do you do that? I'm going to just ask that very open-ended question.
Yeah. It's a really good question. I think a lot about it. For me, the thing I often relate back to is, I mentioned that I work with a theater company that you talked about called Theater Me Too, and for the past 10 years, we've created multiple pieces together, and often the pieces manifest in a very different way, but the questions remain the same. The sensibility remains the same. The artistic aesthetic remains the same, but the output is different. And when you work on something you don't know how to do for 3 years at a time, there are moments that you hate it. There are moments you think it's bad. There are moments you doubt yourself. There are moments that you don't know where the next step is. There are moments where you think you're a fraud. There are moments where you don't know what you're going to do. But you trust that if you surround yourself with the right people that inspire you, that it will be okay. And so when I think about business, I think of the art of institution building, that when I'm building a company or building a program, I'm really relying on my artistic muscles. At the end of the day, I just translate it into different tools. So the tools are now KPIs, which key performance indicators. But all I'm doing is I'm setting myself a bar to set that I have to constantly rise to. And I am constantly asking that question of, who am I? And what is my unique answer to this business question? And how does it become a reflection of myself, much like an art piece? What are the questions I'm wrestling with? And I think for me, it really is centered around those. It's centered around community. It's always centered around who am I gathering, the type of people I'm gathering, and then the tools that I'm using. And I would say business is just different tools than an artist's tools. It's it really is learning, and I'm always learning. So I'm always learning the grammar of an art, of a tool when it comes to building a business versus the the grammar of building a piece of a theater piece or an art piece. Or so yeah, it really comes back to an artistic sensibility, as you say.
Yeah.
How have you
Yeah.
learned?
I think
Because you've talked to
as I'm
people.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, as I'm having these conversations, and I've read, I just completed my MBA in August, so I've kind of dove deeper into the more formal education around business and institution building. I realized that often it's just a grammar and a linguistic difference, and it's more about sharing different words and different ideas and concepts with each other, and letting each other into different realities, or the frameworks of the different realities that we live in based on the language that we use. So I really love that grammar building, and what you've identified, a KPI is something that is a word that we use in business, or a phrase, but then in the arts, that's a different. It's about what emotion you're eliciting in the viewer, or how you're reacting to that moment, if it's authentic. To what you're listening to, or what is arising out of you.
Yeah, you're listening to a customer, and listen, and like deeply listening to what do they want, right? It's the same. It's like acting, in many ways, and it's really actually as you articulated, it validates this. It's like as you were talking, I was thinking about, the art of building an institution, much like an art of building a piece like you don't know, is you have to be willing to fail fast and create fast, pivot, much like you do in an artistic room, right? I'm going to create this, no attachment. I'm going to move on. And also, you need to have a mindset where you're like, I don't know how to do this, but I'm going to go figure it out. And you and I can talk a whole nother podcast about arts training. Sometimes pivots people into like being like, I only do this. In fact, I think the way education is moving forward, because I work with a lot of folks on the future of education, is really teaching people how to adapt quickly, because technology is moving so fast that, in fact, the muscles you learn in a creation room are the muscles you need to create pivot, no attachment. It becomes, again, at the end of the day, it's like, I go like this. It's like building a business, artistic, spiritual. And I would say this I wouldn't say this on a business podcast, but I would say this to you, that I believe it's a spiritual practice at the end of the day. It is very ancient, and I work in Web3, which we can talk about in a moment. Web3 is based on trust. It's based on a human idea of trust. And so when I work in Web3, I think about my time in Mongolia. I think about working with nomads. I think about how they build community. I think about the fundamental human representation that technology it represents, versus no, it's human. It's very human. It's just represented through numbers. Yeah.
The other, before we dive into Web3, which I'm super excited to do, something I want to layer on to what you said, that reminded me of, maybe to go back to the art training, something that you do in acting training before you start to develop characters is a lot of work on yourself to understand who you are, where you come from. I know when I did lucid body work in Berlin, that was one of the turning points of understanding the persona and the shadow and the child need, and breaking it down based on psychological factors. But unless you do that work, I believe you're not able to authentically respond to a moment when you're someone else, when you're a character. And same for a business. If as a business you don't understand why you're doing what you're doing, or what impact you want to have, and really laying the foundation for why you're selling something, or if we want to, like, vanity-wise, while you're selling something, or why you want to create a different community around your brand, or your product, or your service, or your project, until you know that and you have clarity on that, I don't think that people will trust you fully.
So true.
So yeah.
Yeah, it's all I teach. It's all I teach. Yeah, it's all I lead.
Yeah.
I currently lead an incubator in Web3, and what I really teach at the end of the day is I teach how the importance of understanding who you are and what you're, and specifying what you're doing. I mean, we could go all day about the acting. It's like the acting note I give to people, because I also run an acting studio with my mentor, is simplify, specify, and I'll say stakes. And what I mean by that is, hey, whatever you're doing, just make it simpler. Like, don't do as much. Same thing in business. Simplify. Specify. Like, make sure you're really doing that fully. Same thing in business. Like, specify your target. And then stakes. Why does it matter to you? Why are you the one to do it? Why do you have to get it right now? And often, knowing oneself, that's the power of, working in business. Often we're reacting to internal, like you said, like the shadow or the child. Like, there are things at work that sometimes that are great gifts to us. I certainly have them because of how I was raised and who I was, where I come from. And it's understanding those that allow me to move forward. So I could talk about it all day.
But it's the same for the communications agency that I'm building. The entire idea is to unearth the stories that inspire founders. So really going, rather than just being a marketing agency that provides services, social media management, whatever, to really say, no, before we do that, let's kind of go back to the story that you want to tell. Let's look into why you built this business. What is the core of it? And then bring that through everything, because I do believe that exactly clarifies what you're saying, what you put so beautifully, the simplify, specify, and stakes. And I think in that process, you will often discover that unless you have that mindfulness as a business owner or as a founder, the stakes might be completely wrong. If the stakes are only to make money for yourself, then who is going to relate to that or connect with it? Yeah,
exactly.
And I find that, especially in the Web3 space, that currently seems to be still a threat through it. It's a creation of tokens, of coins, just to make quick money, to ride on a high before we hit the bear market that we're in right now. But, maybe we move to that. So you're currently working as the director of creative programming for Hug Studios. Tell me a little bit more about that. What is Hug, and what do you do?
Yeah, so Hug was co-founded by Randy Zuckerberg, who is a colleague of mine, and this woman named Debbie Soon. And the goal of Hug is twofold. One is it's ultimately to what they call build the inclusiverse, to build a more diverse Web3. And, that is really looking at the empowering women, empowering different cultures around the world to remind them that they too belong at the forefront of technology. And so we've built a curation and discovery platform that is really looking at curating and discovering projects across all of Web3. And then what I do is Hug Studios, which is an incubator that really focuses on projects that are launching in the space, projects that have already launched and are looking to scale, and then an artist in residence program. And so I lead all of the programming centered around that and advise over 50 projects in the space. And, part of what I do at Hug is also I get to work with other big brands, really look at their strategy of how they're interacting with Web3, and really have an opportunity to co-learn with people. One of the things I think I value as being a teacher is not the Socratic method, not standing in front of my students, but standing with them, looking at a problem and trying to identify how we solve it together. So so that's a little bit beautiful about Hug Studios.
Thank you for sharing that. And
Yeah.
I'm a member of that community, and it's so beautiful to go through that platform and look at the different projects that exist and just be inspired by everything that people are doing.
And the
yeah.
fact that at least, I wasn't around for the birth of Web 2, which is, and when I say Web 2 and Web 3, for the audience, I want to kind of define those, because sometimes people are like, what's that mean? And it makes me sound smart. So but my hope is that everyone can understand this. Part of what I do is I'm a translator in some ways, Web 2 was called I would say the social economy, right? So it was the rise of social interaction on the web. So Web 1 was when, you could just go to a website and you could get information, but you couldn't interact with that information. Like I go CNN.com and I could read the news. And that was a revolution. That's the digital revolution. Web 2, which really came about in the mid-2000s, was the rise of social media. The fact that I could go to a website, I could review things, that other people could read my reviews. I could interact with people from around the world. I could connect with people from around the world. And then now what we're in is what I'll call the ownership economy. So with the rise of cryptocurrency and blockchain technology, we have this opportunity to co-own things and co-own worlds and co-design worlds and co-design programs. And so this is very new. It's only, while the technology has been around since the late 2000s, it only started to really take off. Crypto started to take off, of course, throughout the past 10 years, but NFTs have really catapulted the industry, which I always like to say is because it was art that really catapulted. Because artists function often, they go into the places of the unknown to beautify it, to make it accessible. And then as someone who's on the front lines of this, this stuff is coming. It's coming fast. And big brands will come to this, and suddenly it will be invisible. Right now, it's so intimidating. You don't know what it is. So it's clunky. It's new technology. In 5 years, it will be very invisible. Everybody will interact with the blockchain. They just won't know it. It's really exciting stuff.
Yeah, it's kind of building a foundation for a new world.
Yeah.
And the way we interact with each other, the way we can own things that we make, or our own parts of ourselves that we put into the digital world that we haven't been able to own before. I love that. I love that definition. That was really helpful. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah, of course.
So you're talking about the rise of NFTs, and blockchain, that the industry was really it was pinpointed to be born around 2012 or 2013, I think, with Bitcoin. So at the beginning, it was very more of a drive towards decentralizing currencies and being able to not rely on a country's currency, but having a freer flow of money that people can track and trace, and all of that. So how has that industry changed with the rise of NFTs as you've been observing it, and then as you entered into it, now working on the front lines? Do you feel like artistic sensibilities have been brought into that space? Were they there before? Something else you said was you have the ability to co-create. What does that mean in this context of artistic sensibilities?
Yeah, it's a great question. I've been crypto adjacent since 2017, but it didn't feel accessible at that time. And then about a year ago, a year and a half ago, kind of during the rise of the pandemic, people were at home and they were interested in, investigating. And of course, people were interested in placing, taking more risks, I think, because for a whole multitude of reasons. And suddenly NFTs came up. And for Randy and I, who work in the theater space in New York, we found ourselves both advising and interacting with these amazing creators on the front lines of Web3. And we felt more like we belonged there than we did in the theater community, which I thought was really interesting. Partly because they had more of an artistic sensibility. And what I mean by that is theater in New York is an institution. It's old, it's very ancient, right? And so it moves very slow. And that's part of why institutions exist. They are stable. Web3 is not very stable, as we know. It's because it's shifting so incredibly fast. And there's something about when you show up to that, there is a huge amount of artistic sensibility, a lot of questioning of what can we do? What is possible with this technology? And you have a multitude of answers to that. And that's what I think excites me, because it goes back to that artistic response to a question. And I think people are filled with a lot of questions in this moment. And so with the fact that NFTs really pushed Web3 adoption forward is because they were in some ways putting artistic identity at the center of that. You talked a little bit about this, and we're going to see this as time and the technology moves forward, digital identity. The kind of rise of how do I show up in a digital world? And, I want to say, like, this is not like, one day we'll live in this virtual reality. It might manifest that way, but it manifests right now. The fact that you and I are really in a digital world right now, right? We're not in the same room.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
We and you've seen this on Zoom. People sometimes put filters on their Zoom. They sometimes put backgrounds on their Zoom. Sometimes they'll put like little pirate hats. Like already we're attempting to change the way we show up virtually, curate our digital experience. And as the technology moves forward, and the opportunity to connect. And that's what it comes down to in this, we'll call it metaverse, is the reason it's different from a video game is the amount of connection and experience you can have. And the questions that are being asked around that are really exciting, really beautiful. So yes, I have found it is a very deeply artistic space. Because no one has the answers. There is no codified way to do things. And it's purely artistic response. And you find, because of that when someone, going back to what you said about finding yourself, when someone answers a question with a very unique answer that is purely them, they succeed. Otherwise, they imitate. There's a lot of imitation in the space, all normal things in business, but the unique answers are the ones that they are the loudest. It's really fascinating.
Yeah. To add on to that question of curiosity, the mechanisms of business don't escape that world.
Yeah.
Because you still need to build a brand or a project. It needs to be scalable. It needs to have some sort of income to sustain itself, to sustain the people that are working on it so that they can have a life. If it is a full-time project, how have you seen creators, I don't want to say reconcile potentially the tension between this artistic sensibility and impulse of creation and answering a question in a unique way, but still having to maybe fit themselves into certain frameworks that allow them to be successful in the world that we're still living in?
Yeah, they really struggle, to be honest with you.
Mm.
We're in a moment where you were talking earlier about what's called a bear market. So at the kind of beginning of the year, there was what's called a bull market. So everything was going up and everyone was excited and there was so much creation happening and people just wanted to respond and support creation. No longer is that the case. Now it's people don't have as much income to just throw at things. And so they're much more conservative and they're looking for what I'll call utility. And I think this is an interesting moment as an artist, because I get excited, because it's demanding that art have engagement, art have encounter, it have some type of addition to just the art. And again, I'm someone who, there is a place where art is art, and it can be art. But art as commerce, art as business, is a very difficult thing for people to grasp. But it will ultimately, as someone who helps run a theater company, the only reason that theater company is around is because of business acumen, not just the art. It's the reason we are able to sustain ourselves, and it comes together to say, like, I like that you brought up, like, working full time on it, having it being sustainable. Those are all business tools. Those aren't art tools. You don't think about, like, when I create a piece of art about something I'm wrestling with, I don't think, how is this sustainable, and how's this, like, but on the flip side, if I apply business acumen to that, I can actually spread that art more in the world. So the tension is very, very clear, very, very true. And that's why I'm so grateful to have both of those muscles. And I fail at them, both of them all the time. I'm not perfect by any means, but they hold me accountable because I've put myself being full-time as an artist and full-time in the world of business. I always say to myself, oh, this is like being in a show where I know it's going to close and nothing is certain. Everything is uncertain. And so I need to act as if this won't be around. And while that's sometimes brings me a little anxiousness, it also brings me comfort, to remind myself that, imagine, Sebastian, like, imagine a year ago, did you imagine where you would be? Like, did you think you would be where you are? Me neither, and that's amazing. And that's an incredible way to live your life. It's also very uncertain, and it's anxious. And sometimes I don't know, and sometimes I doubt myself. But at the end of the day, it's deeply exciting to be on the front lines of that, to know that and trust that it will be okay. It will be okay. It'll be okay.
Yeah. To have that faith, it reminds me of something that I hold dear from my lessons with Ruben Polendo, the leader of Theater Me Too, incredible theater director, who kept saying in our making theater class, which was this foundational class in my undergraduate, of just learning to make theater, and he kept saying, and these are not his words, these are my words and my experience of them. You, as the creator, you need to give your art and what you're creating meaning you need to have faith that it means something, because if you don't think it means something, then why would anyone else think that there's value in it, or that there's meaning in it? And that kind of instills this faith in you that as long as you believe that what you're doing has an impact, or will have an impact down the line, or will lead to something, there's peace and calm, even in the most tumultuous times and in the biggest storms. So I appreciate that.
Yeah, I think of that lesson often. I remember when he told me that story. It's really powerful.
It's such a powerful lesson. I want to know a little bit more about how can people who are entrenched in being in the arts, or who identify themselves as an artist and have been pursuing that and want to move into more of a business space, or have more of a hybrid identity or engagement, how can they position their sensibilities to enter into that space? What can they do? What can they say? How can they change their mindset?
Yeah, this is going to be perhaps a simple answer, but it's the only thing that comes to my mind is simply do it. And you make the road by walking. Now, there are ways that you can do it, right? You can go get an MBA like you did. That's a great way to do it. You can create your company. Just say that I'm going to create a company, which again, I want to acknowledge is an act of bravery. It's an act. It's courageous. It demands your whole heart. Because when you stake something and you say, I am going to do this, there's an opportunity that it might fail. And I wish, like for instance, for myself, I didn't think of myself as a business person when I started a nonprofit. I didn't think of myself as a business person when I, started an acting studio. I didn't think of I was just simply building community. But as time has gone on, I've been able to, as I learn more business acumen, bring those ideas to fruition faster. So, yeah, I think the act is doing it. And you will most likely not achieve it at the beginning. Most people, there's this mythology that, I launched my business and I made thousands of dollars and I made, I was so wealthy overnight. That never happens. It doesn't happen like that. It's slow, it's tumultuous, but I want to celebrate the opportunity to step forward and to say, this is who I am. It's again, we'll keep going back to this, and I hope it's not too much, but it's artistic in a way,
Yeah.
And that's what you have to do it. You do not, like Anne Bogart says, as an art for director prepares. She was talking with directors. Do not wait. Do not wait. Create now. And then 20 years will pass by and you'll realize, oh, here I am. Oh, I'm actually at the front. I'm at the front of the line now. And that's a beautiful thing.
I love that. Yeah, this idea of just also in a way do it, create something that you want to, follow that impulse, and you don't need to have it all mapped out before. There doesn't need to be an end goal in mind and 20 years down the line, this is what I want to have achieved. Well, that is great, and it helps to stay focused. I think there's power in just following the impulse of creation and doing, and then looking back after 10 years and saying, oh, well, that makes sense.
Yeah.
This kind of now all fits together and makes sense. Yeah.
I'm sure you've. I remember my grandfather was like, "You're gonna make it one day." I was like, "Oh, I made it. I made it." But it seems like, my dad would be like, "Oh, you'll find what you want to do one day." I'm like, "No, I found it." Because it seems like I'm doing. Like, how can I describe what I do? Like, I do all these things. And people always like, "I don't know what you do," and I'm like, "That's okay."
Yeah.
But I believe in what I do, and I believe, and I think I think we as a culture are becoming more accepting of we'll call multi-hyphenate is a phrase that's thrown around, of people that do many things, because I think the culture and the opportunities and the technology has allowed us to become multi-dimensional. My mom was a nurse. She was a nurse through and through. My dad was an engineer. He was not an engineer and an entrepreneur. He was not, now you and I are multiple things. I can't imagine what our children will be,
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. It's incredible. Maybe to turn that question around then, what can companies do to encourage bringing artistic sensibilities into their culture, into their engagements? I think you alluded to that already a little bit with talking about the metaverse and how many companies and brands are looking into adopting that creativity that comes with NFTs and that technology. Dive a little bit deeper into that.
Yeah, it's weird. As someone who both has experienced leadership training, teaches leadership training, teaches acting training, I don't know. I don't think the answer is doing improv in cultural, like company settings. I don't think it's that. Now, here's the thing. I want to be humble. I don't have the answer of how you train, and nor do I want to propose that I think I know what's best. However, The only thing I think one can train, which you can point to be artistic, that I've seen across people that are successful in business, and how we define success can be different. But for how I define success, is they're willing to place themselves in opportunities where they will look like a fool and they'll be a beginner. And they constantly do that over and over and over again. And they put their full self into it, even though they're not good at it. And everyone calls them a fool, and everyone thinks they're silly, and everyone thinks like how crazy you are. But guess what? Those people are the ones, hand over fist, I see, quote unquote, succeed. And so can a company, can a culture encourage to give heart, as you would put in the phrase of what the word means, to an opportunity to train that? You could train that through improv. That's a way to do it, but I think every human being is different, and I think it really comes down to if I was to structure it, I would say every manager is holding potential in every individual's hand that they lead. And they have an opportunity to look at that person and say, how can if I understand that container of failure and doing, what is their mode of creation? And how can I encourage that? So if I'm working with a coder, maybe I can encourage them to make a piece of a code that has nothing to do. They used to use Facebook. They would do hackathons. And the whole role of the hackathon was creation. It's a creative act. It's like, come work on something that you would never work on at work, and we're going to discover something together. So that was like Facebook's answer. I think that's a really powerful answer. But that's if you're a coder. If I look at someone who is a marketer, how can I encourage that sense of failure and learning a new tool? So yeah, that's my answer. I don't know the answer, I think, at the end of the day. What about you? What have you discovered? Yeah. What have you, in your kind of searches and travels and MBAs and all those things?
That's a very good question. My mind immediately got to I think a similar answer: do something that you don't usually do. So the easy way is to do improv training. But something simpler too is that I've discovered that I've done is just a simple breathing class or a simple voice class that can really change how people speak or feel. And it doesn't need to be like an overt theater thing. It can just simply be, okay, let's do some breath work and lay on the ground. I did this with my interns who at the art gallery where I worked at before. I did that once to kind of let them into how do you speak in public? How can you speak more powerfully without straining your voice? Because it was just about that simple, you need to give tours. And I think that encouraged a bit more of a different perspective, and it changed the working environment. It changed it to, we can be vulnerable in front of each other a little bit, and we can have different conversations. So I think something as simple as that, where you don't have to be in front of other people and do something and act, something introspective that you do together can really transform the space as well and the community that you're in.
It's so true.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's hard. It's hard, especially when you're working so hard and you're building so fast. And, I work at a startup, so we all live around the world. We don't live in the same place. And you think about how powerful it is to gather. It's deeply, deeply powerful to gather and to have those incidental conversations, those spaces. It's those places of growth that really allow us to connect.
Yeah, that I feel like we could take a whole other hour to talk about this.
Yeah.
But sadly we're at time. So I want to ask you the last question for today, which is what are your next big milestones and what intentions are you setting for them?
Yeah, I really appreciated this question. You sent it to me in advance, so I've been thinking about such things. And, and I imagine the listener feels this way, that I need to ask this question more often. I look back at this past year and I think to myself, oh my gosh, like I've never would have imagined I'd be doing this. And okay, so actually, in fact, going to India and going to see Guru Kal is an answer to that, is to go back to, often I go to Big Sur, which is a place on the west coast of California, and I go to a monastery and I sit in silence. And the reason I do that is because it's to discover what is my next big milestone. So I'm in the process of doing that. But when I saw that question, I thought to myself, Michael, what's going to get you out of bed every morning? And the answer is, one, I want to make this incubator that I'm creating a Web3 incubator, and to continue to find opportunities to onboard creatives or people around the world. I was just in Moldova, working with Ukrainians and Moldovans, and people that often feel like they don't belong in business, they don't belong in technology. I want to continue to make them feel like they belong. So there is this sense of like, I want to achieve a place that I look at it and I go, yes, that's right. That's what, whether you're an actor, an artist, or a Ukraine, or someone from a different part of the world, you belong. You too belong. That's number one. So I want to continue to build this business that I'm building at Hug, because it is part of my legacy in some way, and so that's that. But the other part is to balance, while doing that, which is a very time-consuming act, balance my life and my art, because at the end of the day, art is always there, and I'll have an artistic experience. I'm like, oh, there you are. Oh, I forgot about you. Not that I don't. And so having a more dedicated arts practice, daily practice. And so when I'm doing that, it's I'm going down to get a banjo because my family plays mountain music, and I want to have that daily practice for me. No, for like I'm working on some songs, but I want to balance that artistic practice, not when I come into a room and work with Theater Me Too and now I'm going to work as an artist. My own, this is just for me. That, my business, and then my life.
I love that.
And that's what I'm looking at. So I'm in process, and the ways I'm doing that is I'm going down to where my mom's from, my family's from. I'm going back to Guru Kal. I'm going back to places that place me in touch with Michael, not Michael the business person, not Michael the artist, not Michael, but Michael, and searching in some way how to make Michael come through. And I hope the listener has their own versions and answers to that, and hope you have your own answer to that. Yeah. I wish I could tell you a KPI. I wanted to tell you a KPI. I wanted to be like, my KPI is I'm going to onboard 10,000 people, but I'm not there yet.
And I think that's fine. And I love that you're sharing mid-process. Thank you.
Yeah.
I think it's so good to be reminded that in some way we're always mid-process, and it's good to acknowledge that and to own that. Thank you, Michael. Where can people learn more about you if they want to find out more about you?
I'm on the socials at Michael Littig on Instagram. I don't really. One thing I'm holding myself accountable. I'm always thinking about. I wonder if the listener feels this way. Is how do I use those platforms for good? And I haven't cracked that yet artistically. I'm still searching for that. So I'll leave a question around that. But I'm on the socials. thehug.xyz if you want to learn about Hug and all the things that we're building there, thehug.xyz. And it's an invitation for anyone that's listening. If anything I said to you sparks you, interests you, wow, what a gift it would be if you dropped me a message and we could open up a conversation and connect. One of my deep loves is connecting with people from around the world, like Sebastian. And so my as they say, the kids say, my DMs are open. Yeah, so that's where you can come find me. Yeah.
DM Michael.
Thank you, friend.
Thank you so much.
What an
And
honor.
thank you for joining me on
You're
this
incredible.
episode.
You really are incredible, and what a gift you are to all these people that listen to you.
Thank you for listening to today's episode of The Arts in Business. Episodes are being released weekly, so make sure to follow or subscribe. I hope you have a great week ahead of you.